At this very instant, your soul is already aligned with a particular spiritual realm, determined by the current state of your consciousness. Edgar Cayce, widely regarded as America's most gifted psychic, detailed this reality through more than 14,000 documented psychic readings, carefully preserved in Virginia Beach. In the year 1923, during one of his most profound trance states, Cayce startled his stenographer by revealing the existence of 7 separate spiritual dimensions where souls reside between lifetimes on Earth. He didn't just identify these planes, he outlined the exact criteria that determine which level a soul can access, and more crucially, how one can raise their frequency while still alive. But before we dive into these transformative insights, I ask you to do one thing: click the subscribe button and activate notifications. This knowledge has been left out of mainstream spirituality for almost 100 years, and YouTube's algorithm often buries content this important from the people who need it most. Now, here's a truth so profound, it could forever shift your understanding of spiritual growth. In one particularly unsettling reading from the mid-1920s, Cayce revealed that the majority of people are unknowingly operating from the lowest level of spiritual awareness, a dimension he referred to as the material consciousness realm. This is a plane so densely packed with ego and attachment to physical reality that some souls remain trapped there for hundreds of lifetimes. But the revelations get even darker. During a reading in 1932 for a businessman, something extraordinary happened. Cayce's voice changed mid-session, taking on what witnesses described as a tone not of this world. He disclosed that this man's soul had been repeating the same level of existence for more than 800 years, due to a recurring error in consciousness across lifetimes. Gladys Davis, Cayce's stenographer, later noted that she had never seen him so disturbed during a session. When he emerged from the trance, he had no memory of what he'd just said, but the message was unmistakable. This soul was imprisoned, and Cayce had witnessed something that visibly shook him. This realization challenges everything we assume about spiritual development. Many believe that reincarnation alone leads to higher awareness. Cayce's readings prove otherwise. He documented numerous cases of souls who had lived through thousands of years without ever advancing past the first spiritual level. Let me help you visualize what Cayce saw when he accessed the Akashic Records, that metaphysical archive where every soul's history is stored. Picture 7 immense levels of consciousness, each one vibrating at a different spiritual frequency. At the base is what Cayce called the earthbound level. These are souls so entangled in fear, materialism, and ego that they become prisoners of their own making. One particularly well-recorded case involved souls trapped in this plane since the fall of Atlantis, over 12,000 years ago. These weren't monsters or criminals. They were average people who never learned to evolve beyond instinct. Again and again they chose ease over growth, fear over love, ego over service. And here's the most unsettling part. Cayce said these souls don't even realize they're stuck. They believe they're evolving because they keep going through the cycle of human life, working, loving, suffering, dying, and being reborn. But their level of awareness never truly advances. They become like spiritual automatons, endlessly repeating the same cycles across lifetimes without ever waking up. Now, before you start worrying about your own spiritual state, let me share something that may offer hope. In the year 1944, just 1 year before his passing, Cayce gave what many believe to be his most significant reading on the evolution of consciousness. A woman from New York asked him directly, "How can I tell which spiritual plane I'm currently operating from?" His response was so insightful that researchers of metaphysics have studied it for over 8 decades. Cayce explained that every human being is constantly receiving signs that reveal their spiritual frequency, but most are too absorbed in everyday concerns to notice. These signs appear in the form of dreams, sudden realizations, strange coincidences, and what he referred to as soul promptings. Those intuitive moments when you simply know something to be true, even if logic can't explain it. But here's the incredible part. Cayce gave a precise test to identify your current spiritual frequency. In one of his most actionable readings, he described what he called the consciousness mirror technique. This is not some vague meditation routine. It's a grounded, 5-minute process that reveals the exact level of your soul's present consciousness. Here's how to try it, and I strongly encourage you to do this right after finishing this video. Cayce said, "When you encounter someone who triggers a strong negative emotional reaction in you, such as anger, jealousy, judgment, or fear, what you're really seeing is a reflection of an unresolved part of your own consciousness. The strength of your reaction shows you your vibrational level. If your first instinct is judgment or irritation, you're likely rooted in the first level, material consciousness. If you feel empathy and a willingness to understand, you're tapping into a higher realm. But if you're able to see that individual as a soul having a human experience and feel genuine love for their path, you're functioning from what Cayce called the Christ consciousness, the highest state accessible during earthly life. This technique was so accurate that Cayce personally used it to determine which souls were prepared for deeper spiritual learning and which still needed foundational development. It was never wrong. Now let me tell you something that will completely shift how you think about soul evolution. In 1936, Cayce performed a reading for a woman who claimed to have once lived in Atlantis. Many expected him to dismiss her as delusional. Instead, Cayce not only confirmed her Atlantean past, but unveiled a revelation that would change our understanding of consciousness forever. He explained that souls from Atlantis had access to spiritual technologies and awareness levels that far surpass anything known today. But the most astonishing part? Cayce said many of those highly evolved souls chose to incarnate during the 20th century specifically to guide humanity through a massive leap in spiritual evolution. According to Cayce, between the years 1900 and 2000, thousands of these Atlantean souls would be reborn, retaining spiritual memory and access to higher realms. Their mission? To anchor advanced spiritual energy on Earth and teach others how to ascend. That means some individuals alive today are functioning at consciousness levels millennia ahead of the collective norm. And they're not here by accident. They came with purpose, to help our entire species reach the next phase of evolution. But here's what's even more powerful. Cayce stated that any soul, regardless of their current level, can accelerate spiritual growth drastically by applying the universal laws of spiritual development. In one of his most in-depth readings, he listed 5 specific practices that can elevate a soul from the lowest spiritual frequency to the highest, all within a single lifetime. These are not rituals or dogmas. They are universal truths anyone can begin using right now. The first law is what Cayce termed service above self. But this isn't just about volunteering, it's far deeper. Every choice you make, whether it's your breakfast, your reaction to criticism, or how you treat others, either fuels your ego or advances your soul. Souls stuck in lower planes always choose ego-driven behavior. Souls on higher planes make decisions that uplift consciousness, both their own and others. And this is where Cayce's teachings become especially relevant for modern seekers. In one of his most practical sessions on the subject of wealth, he addressed the primary obstacle facing spiritual growth in both the 20th and 21st centuries. The illusion that wealth equals spiritual growth is one of the most dangerous traps. Cayce revealed that many souls actually regress spiritually when they become materially successful, mistaking financial comfort for inner evolution. In fact, he saw countless cases where individuals had been more spiritually advanced in prior lifetimes, marked by poverty, than they were in their current incarnation as wealthy individuals. This doesn't mean that money itself is bad. What matters is how you relate to it. If your wealth supports your spiritual purpose and uplifts others, it elevates your frequency. But if it inflates your ego and creates division, it becomes a weight that holds you in the lower vibrational planes. The second universal law Cayce identified is that thought is a creative force. In one of his deepest revelations, he explained that most people don't realize they're constantly constructing their spiritual reality through their own mental patterns. Every thought, whether conscious or unconscious, either raises or lowers your spiritual vibration. Here's the part most spiritual teachers don't share. Positive thinking alone is not enough. Cayce observed that some souls actually used positivity to bypass their inner wounds, avoiding their shadow side entirely. This avoidance led them into spiritual stagnation, not growth. True spiritual development, he taught, requires what he called purification through truth. This means confronting your own darkness with courage, acknowledging every flaw, every mistake, every wound, and loving yourself anyway. Only then does the soul unlock access to the higher realms, where true transformation becomes possible. The third law is healing as a form of spiritual service. But Cayce wasn't just referring to physical healing. In one of his most groundbreaking insights, he revealed that healing any part of yourself sends ripples through the collective. Even people you've never met benefit from your inner transformation. Why? Because all consciousness is interconnected. When you release fear, you lighten the fear within all of humanity. When you heal shame, you help unburden generations. When you choose peace instead of anger, you make it easier for others to do the same. Your personal spiritual growth isn't a private affair. It's a contribution to humanity's evolution. Every act of forgiveness, every moment of love, every surrender to truth pulls the entire planet upward into higher vibration. Now here's something that will forever reshape how you see your soul's journey. In the year 1942, Cayce revealed what he considered the most critical factor in determining a soul's place in the afterlife. And it wasn't good deeds, hours of meditation, or esoteric knowledge. It was the soul's capacity for real forgiveness. He called forgiveness the master key to all higher spiritual realms. But he didn't mean the superficial forgiveness most people practice, saying the words while still secretly holding on to resentment. Cayce spoke of what he described as Christ-like forgiveness, a total release of the need for the other person to be different than they are. This kind of forgiveness is so rare, Cayce said, that he saw it in fewer than 1 out of every 100 people he read for. Most people confuse suppression or superiority for real release. But true forgiveness means seeing through the illusion of separateness and recognizing that everyone, even those who hurt us, is acting from the level of consciousness they currently inhabit. Here's a powerful example. In 1938, a woman came to Cayce, furious that her husband had left her and their 3 children for his secretary. She wanted assurance that karma would catch up to him in the next life. Cayce's reply stunned everyone in the room. He said that this betrayal was a gift to her soul, a challenge forcing her to choose between bitterness and awakening. If she could find genuine forgiveness, not for his sake but for her own freedom, she would take a massive leap forward in her soul's evolution. The woman followed Cayce's guidance for 2 years, and when she finally forgave, completely and without condition, she experienced a shift so powerful that Cayce later confirmed her soul had moved from the 2nd to the 5th spiritual realm, a leap that usually takes many lifetimes. But here's what's even more remarkable. 3 months later, her ex-husband, unaware of her inner work, called her, describing a spontaneous spiritual awakening and asking to make peace. Her internal shift had somehow triggered his. That's what Cayce meant when he said, "Heal yourself, and others will heal with you." Consciousness isn't limited by time or space. When one soul evolves, it opens the path for others, across families, timelines, and even past lives, to rise as well. Now let's talk about the 4th universal law, death as a conscious transition. Most people think of death as something that just happens to them, but Cayce's readings paint a different picture, one where death is not an end, but a process your soul participates in, depending on your level of awareness. In one of his clearest descriptions of the afterlife, Cayce said that souls who cultivate higher consciousness can choose the way they pass. They do not die in fear or confusion. They step through the threshold with grace, intention, and sometimes even knowledge of what awaits them. They can remain aware as they transition, retain their memories and personality, and even influence where and how they reincarnate. But for those still bound to the lower realms of consciousness, death is not peaceful. It's disorienting. Edgar Cayce described how many souls don't even realize they've died. They drift for what can feel like decades in what he called the earthbound state, unable to rise into the higher dimensions because their energy is too heavy, too dense with fear, attachment, or regret. And this is why spiritual evolution isn't just about improving your day-to-day life. It's about preparing for a conscious death and an intentional rebirth. Every moment you spend expanding your awareness, raising your frequency, and releasing your ego is an investment into your soul's eternal journey. The fifth and final universal law Cayce revealed may be the most transformative of all. Time is an illusion. In one of his most mind-bending sessions, Cayce explained that souls who evolve into the higher realms begin to operate from what he called eternal now consciousness. In this state, there's no separation between past, present, and future. Everything happens at once and can be accessed at will. While this sounds abstract, the implications are profoundly practical. When you shift into this frequency, you are no longer haunted by the past or anxious about the future. You live in full presence, and in that presence, you access the deepest source of creation, the now moment. Cayce himself demonstrated this during his readings. He was able to tap into any point in time, foresee probable futures, and even communicate with beings that had never existed in physical form. But this wasn't magic. It wasn't a gift he was born with. It was the result of spiritual laws he practiced, the same laws you now know. But perhaps the most powerful revelation came in a reading from the year 1943, where Cayce described the true purpose of incarnating on Earth. Contrary to what many believe, the goal is not to escape the physical or to ascend beyond the human experience. The purpose is to bring heaven to Earth, to embody higher states of consciousness here and now, in this form, on this planet. This means you are not here to outgrow your humanity. You are here to evolve humanity itself. And every time a soul awakens, the ripple effect lifts the entire human experience. Cayce foresaw that by the year 2012, enough awakened souls would be incarnated, that a tipping point would be reached. Humanity would begin to vibrate on higher spiritual frequencies as a collective. And he was right. Children born after this time often show signs of natural psychic abilities, inner wisdom beyond their years, and an innate rejection of fear-based systems. They are here on purpose. They are here to help. But Cayce's most empowering message is this: your current level of consciousness is not permanent. It's fluid. It changes with every thought, every choice, every act of awareness. The real question isn't, where am I spiritually today? The real question is, where do I want to go next? And what am I willing to change to get there? In one of his simplest but most effective techniques, Cayce gave this instruction. Before sleep each night, ask your soul, show me one way I can serve love more fully tomorrow. Just one. Then look for that opportunity when you wake, and take it. Practice daily. This method can raise your consciousness more in a few months than most souls achieve in a lifetime. Why? Because it aligns your mind with your soul's purpose, and that unlocks everything. But remember, spiritual evolution isn't about becoming perfect or leaving your humanness behind. It's about becoming real, becoming who you were always meant to be, the divine self beneath the masks, beyond the fear and outside the limitations this world has placed on you. Your soul chose to be here now, in this time, in this body, because something inside you knows. You're ready. You have something vital to contribute to the future of humanity. You are here on mission, and the spiritual realm you'll reach after this life. It won't be based on past failures or current fears. It will be shaped by every act of love, of forgiveness, of truth you choose from this moment forward. Across over 14,000 readings, Edgar Cayce returned to the same truth again and again. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience, and the reality you experience in this life and beyond is created by what you choose today. So here's your next step. Take the consciousness mirror test. Observe your reactions to the people who trigger you most. These reactions aren't flaws, they're signposts. They show you where to grow, where to love more, where to heal. Practice radical forgiveness, not because others deserve it, but because you deserve the freedom it brings. Serve others, not for validation or recognition, but because service is what naturally flows from an awakened soul. And never forget, you are not alone on this path. Every soul who has ever lived is connected to you through the same divine intelligence that Cayce accessed. When you rise, we all rise. When you heal, it echoes through the whole of humanity. Your personal evolution is not separate from the collective. The choices you make now are writing the future, not just of your afterlife, but of human consciousness itself. So make those choices count. Before you go, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because I'll be sharing more revelations from Edgar Cayce's readings. Timeless wisdom that can shift your spiritual journey forever. Like this video if it stirred something in your soul. Share it with someone who needs to remember who they truly are. Because your voice, your light, your story, they matter more than you know. Keep choosing love. Keep seeking truth. Keep serving the highest good. Because your soul and the world depends on it. In the summer of 1923, a desperate printer from Dayton, Ohio, sat across from a man lying unconscious on a simple couch in Virginia Beach. Arthur Lammers had traveled hundreds of miles, seeking answers that no doctor, no philosopher, no religious leader could provide. What happened in that? The unconscious man was Edgar Cayce, and what emerged from his lips that day shattered everything Arthur thought he knew about life, death, and the purpose of human existence. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. Every word that came through Cayce that afternoon would be documented, verified, and proven again and again through thousands of subsequent readings. You see, Arthur Lammers wasn't just any printer. He was a student of metaphysics, a seeker of ancient wisdom. And when Cayce began speaking about past lives, karma, and the eternal journey of the soul, Lammers realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in modern history. But what happened next would challenge Edgar Cayce's own Christian beliefs and force him to confront the most profound truth about human existence. This wasn't supposed to happen. Cayce, a devout Christian from rural Kentucky, had been giving medical readings for over 20 years, diagnosing illnesses and prescribing treatments while in trance. But on this particular day, something different occurred. When Lammers asked about the purpose of life itself, Cayce began accessing what he would later call the Book of Life, the Akashic Records. And what these records revealed about the soul's real journey would transform not just Arthur Lammers, but millions of people who would later read Cayce's documented words. According to Edgar Cayce's readings, your soul didn't just suddenly appear when you were born. In fact, what Cayce discovered through accessing the Akashic Records was so revolutionary that it initially shook his own Christian faith to its core. The truth he uncovered was this: every soul, including yours, has been on an eternal journey through multiple lifetimes, each one carefully chosen by the soul itself for specific lessons and growth. But this isn't the simplified version of reincarnation you might have heard about. What Cayce revealed was far more sophisticated, far more purposeful, and infinitely more hopeful than anything previously understood in the Western world. When Cayce would enter his trance state and access what he called the Book of Life, he wasn't just reading random spiritual information. He was tapping into what he described as the universe's central computer system, a cosmic database that contained every thought, deed, word, and intention of every soul that had ever existed. Upon time and space is written the thoughts, the deeds, the activities of an entity, Cayce explained in one of his most profound readings. Here's where it gets fascinating. According to Cayce, before each incarnation, your soul doesn't just randomly choose a body or circumstances. There's actually a sophisticated planning process that occurs in what Cayce called the in-between life experience. During this time, your soul reviews the lessons learned and unlearned from previous lifetimes, identifies patterns that need healing, and carefully selects the family, circumstances, and challenges that will provide the greatest opportunities for spiritual growth. According to Cayce's readings, these were all consciously chosen by your soul as part of its evolutionary curriculum. But here's what makes Cayce's understanding of reincarnation so different from other spiritual traditions. He revealed that souls don't just incarnate blindly lifetime after lifetime until they finally get it right. Instead, souls travel in what he called soul groups, clusters of souls who have been working together across multiple lifetimes, playing different roles for each other, helping one another learn and grow. The woman who is your mother in this lifetime might have been your student in ancient Egypt. The challenging colleague who pushes all your buttons might be a soul who has been helping you develop patience and compassion across multiple incarnations. That instant connection you felt with your spouse. According to Cayce, that recognition comes from having shared many lifetimes together, working on complementary lessons. Now let me tell you about something remarkable that happened in Cayce's own readings about ancient Egypt. Through accessing the Akashic records, Cayce revealed that he himself had lived a significant lifetime as a high priest named Rata during Egypt's Golden Age. But this wasn't just any ordinary past life reading. The detail and consistency of these Egyptian readings was so extraordinary that it would later be compiled into multiple volumes. According to these readings, Rata was instrumental in the building of the Great Pyramid, working alongside the master architect Hermes. But more importantly, Rata introduced revolutionary spiritual concepts to Egypt, including the understanding of oneness with the divine, concepts that would later influence the spiritual evolution of humanity for thousands of years. The readings described how Rata established temples of healing and learning, where individuals could come to understand their soul's purpose and develop their spiritual gifts. This reveals something profound about why you're alive right now, in this particular time in history. According to Cayce, souls choose not just their purpose. Many souls specifically chose to incarnate during this pivotal period in human history because their previous experiences had prepared them to contribute to humanity's next evolutionary leap. In fact, Cayce revealed that many of the souls who had worked together in ancient Egypt during Rata's time were reincarnating together in the 20th century. These same souls who had helped establish temples of healing and spiritual learning in ancient times were returning to help establish a new understanding of holistic health and spiritual development in the modern world. But what happens between these lifetimes? Cayce's readings revealed a detailed map of the soul's journey through what he called planetary sojourns. After completing a lifetime on Earth, the soul doesn't immediately reincarnate. Instead, it travels through various spiritual realms associated with different planets. Not the physical planets themselves, but spiritual dimensions that correspond to different aspects of consciousness. A soul might spend time in what Cayce called the Venus sojourn, to develop greater capacity for love and beauty, or the Jupiter sojourn, to cultivate wisdom and spiritual understanding. These aren't vacation destinations. They're intensive spiritual educational experiences designed to strengthen whatever qualities the soul will need for its next earthly incarnation. During one reading, Cayce described how an individual had spent time in multiple planetary sojourns, developing musical abilities in Venus, leadership qualities in Jupiter, and healing capacities in Neptune, before returning to Earth equipped to serve as both a healer and teacher. These abilities didn't emerge from nowhere. They were carefully cultivated during the soul's journey between lives. And here's something that will change how you view your own talents and interests. According to Cayce, every skill you've easily mastered, every subject that has always fascinated you, every talent that seems to come naturally, these are gifts your soul earned and developed during previous incarnations and planetary sojourns. That inexplicable fear of water, perhaps a traumatic death by drowning in a previous life that your soul is still processing. That instant affinity for ancient Egypt or medieval times. Your soul may have lived significant incarnations during those periods. That burning desire to help others, even when it doesn't make logical sense for your career. Your soul may have committed to service during its planning sessions between lives. Let me share with you how this understanding played out in real, documented cases from Cayce's archives. When a young woman came to Cayce suffering from an unexplained phobia of enclosed spaces, his reading revealed that in a previous lifetime in ancient Egypt, she had been accidentally sealed in a tomb during construction work. The reading explained that her soul was still carrying the trauma of that experience. Through understanding this connection, she was able to work through and heal the phobia that had plagued her current lifetime. Another case involved a man who had always felt an irresistible pull toward medicine, despite having no apparent aptitude for it in his early years. Cayce's reading revealed that in multiple previous incarnations, this soul had served as a healer, once as a monk in medieval Europe who cared for plague victims, and earlier as a temple healer in ancient Egypt during Ra-Ta's time. The reading explained that his soul had specifically chosen his current incarnation to continue this pattern of healing service, despite the initial challenges he would face in developing these abilities in his present lifetime. But Cayce revealed something even more extraordinary about how this soul journey actually works. He discovered that the soul doesn't just passively experience these incarnations. Instead, each soul is actively working toward what he called graduation from the Earth School, reaching a level of spiritual development where reincarnation is no longer necessary. In 18 of his readings, Cayce specifically addressed the concept of reincarnation unnecessary, the state where a soul has completed its earthly learning and mastered what he identified as the three essential patterns: living an ideals-driven life, committed loving service to others, and the consistent practice of forgiveness. Interestingly, Cayce revealed that he himself had achieved this status after his lifetime as Ra-Ta, the high priest in ancient Egypt. Yet his soul chose to reincarnate anyway, not because it needed to, but because of love and commitment to his soul group. This reveals perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the soul's journey. At its highest levels, reincarnation becomes not about personal need, but about conscious service. Now let's talk about the remarkable process through which all of this information was preserved. From September 10, 1923, until Cayce's death in 1945, a young woman named Gladys Davis served as his secretary and stenographer. Every single reading that Cayce gave during this period was recorded by Gladys in shorthand, then carefully transcribed into typewritten copies. Her meticulous documentation is the reason we have such a comprehensive record of Cayce's work today. Gladys wasn't just taking dictation. She was witnessing something unprecedented in human history: the systematic documentation of soul memories spanning thousands of years. Day after day, she would sit in that simple room as Cayce lay unconscious on his couch, his wife. The dedication of these three people, Edgar, Gertrude, and Gladys, created what is now recognized as the most comprehensive psychic database in human history. Over 14,000 readings, containing 24 million words, all meticulously preserved in the archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. But here's what makes this information immediately practical for your life today. Cayce explained that we don't have to wait until death to access information about our soul's journey. Through meditation, dream work, and what he called spiritual bookkeeping, maintaining a... When you find yourself repeatedly facing similar challenges or drawn to the same types of people or situations, you're experiencing what Cayce called karmic memory, your soul's recollection of unfinished business from previous incarnations. But karma, in Cayce's understanding, isn't punishment, it's opportunity. It's your soul's way of presenting you with chances to heal old patterns, develop new capacities, and contribute to the collective evolution of human consciousness. During the Great Depression, when Cayce's own hospital was forced to close, his readings provided hope to countless people by explaining that their current hardships weren't random suffering, but part of their soul's chosen curriculum. A woman who had lost everything learned that her soul had specifically chosen this experience to develop compassion and inner strength that she would need for her future service as a healer and counselor. A man struggling with addiction discovered that his soul was working to transform a pattern of escapism that had persisted across multiple lifetimes, and that his recovery would not only heal his personal journey, but also help countless others facing similar challenges. These weren't just comforting stories, they were detailed, specific insights drawn from Cayce's ability to access each individual's personal Akashic records. And time and again, the guidance proved accurate, leading to profound healing and transformation. The medical readings themselves provide fascinating evidence of this soul continuity. Cayce would often trace current health conditions back to injuries or traumas from previous lifetimes. A woman with chronic back problems might learn that her condition stemmed from a fall from a horse in medieval England. A man with digestive issues might discover that his condition was connected to poisoning in a previous incarnation in ancient Rome. But more remarkably, Cayce's readings revealed that many health conditions were actually opportunities for spiritual growth that the soul had specifically chosen. A person born with certain limitations might have selected those challenges to develop patience, compassion, or inner strength that their soul needed for its evolution. Working with his medical colleagues, including osteopath Dr. Wesley Ketchum and later physicians at his hospital in Virginia Beach, Cayce demonstrated that understanding the soul's journey wasn't just philosophically interesting, it had practical healing applications. When patients understood the deeper spiritual purpose behind their conditions, their healing often accelerated dramatically. The hospital itself, opened in 1928, represented Cayce's vision of truly holistic healing, addressing not just the physical body, but the mental and spiritual aspects of each patient. Patients weren't confined to bed. They participated in group activities, ate carefully prescribed diets, spent time at the beach and engaged in spiritual practices alongside their medical treatments. What Cayce revealed about the soul's journey also explains why meditation and inner spiritual work are so crucial. In the readings, he explained that when we incarnate, our soul consciousness becomes relegated to what we call the subconscious, while ego consciousness dominates our earthly experience. But we have what he called a GPS, a God positioning system, built into our endocrine and chakra systems that can be activated to help us stay aligned with our soul's mission. Through regular meditation and spiritual practice, we can strengthen our connection to our soul consciousness and access guidance about our deeper purpose. We can begin to understand why we chose our particular family, why we're drawn to certain work, why specific relationships trigger such strong reactions, and how our personal healing contributes to the larger pattern of human evolution. One of the most profound aspects of Cayce's revelation concerns the collective nature of soul evolution. According to the readings, individual souls don't evolve in isolation. We're all part of interconnected soul groups, working together across multiple lifetimes to support each other's growth and to contribute to the spiritual evolution of humanity as a whole. The readings revealed that many souls. This explains why certain groups of people feel such strong connections, why some individuals seem to be natural leaders in spiritual or healing work, and why this particular time in history feels so pivotal. According to Cayce, many advanced souls specifically chose to incarnate during this period because their previous experiences had prepared them to help guide humanity through its next stage of development. The technological revolution we're experiencing isn't separate from this spiritual evolution. It's part of it. Cayce's readings predicted that the same creative forces that had been misused in Atlantis, leading to that civilization's destruction, would return in the 20th and 21st centuries. But this time these forces could be directed toward healing and spiritual growth rather than destruction. This is why the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes includes such careful preparation. Each incarnation builds skills, wisdom, and spiritual capacity that will be needed for crucial service during pivotal historical moments. The challenges you've faced, the talents you've developed, the wisdom you've gained, all of this is preparation for the role your soul came here to play in humanity's evolution. But perhaps most importantly, Cayce's revelation about the soul's journey offers hope during humanity's most challenging moments. According to his readings, many souls specifically chose to incarnate during this time period because they had previous experience navigating major evolutionary transitions. The skills you've been developing, the wisdom you've been gaining, the inner strength you've been building, all of this was preparation for the role you came here to play in humanity's next chapter. The readings also revealed something beautiful about the ultimate purpose of the soul's journey. It's not just about individual perfection or escape from earthly existence. The soul's evolution is intimately connected with the evolution of consciousness itself. Each soul that grows in wisdom, compassion, and understanding contributes to the collective awakening of humanity. As Edgar Cayce lay on that simple couch in Virginia Beach, accessing the deepest mysteries of human existence, he was not just channeling information about individual souls. He was revealing the magnificent tapestry of cosmic evolution, showing how each soul's journey is both deeply personal and intimately connected to the spiritual development of all life. The readings described how advanced souls, having completed their earthly lessons, often choose to remain connected to the earth plane as guides and teachers for those still incarnated. These beings, working from the spiritual realms, help orchestrate the synchronicities and opportunities that support each soul's growth during their earthly lifetimes. This reveals another profound truth about your current life. You're not walking this path alone. According to Cayce's readings, each soul has spiritual guides, often souls from their own soul group who have completed their earthly incarnations, providing guidance and support throughout their lifetime. These guides communicate through dreams, intuitive impressions, synchronistic events, and inner knowing. Understanding this changes everything about how you approach your daily life. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for growth that your soul specifically chose. Every relationship becomes a chance to work out karma or develop new capacities with souls you've known across multiple lifetimes. Every talent or interest becomes a clue to your soul's deeper purpose and the gifts you came here to share. The printer Arthur Lammers left that session in 1923 forever changed, understanding for the first time that his life had meaning far beyond what he could see on the surface. And now, nearly a century later, with over 14,000 documented readings preserved in the archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, we have access to the most comprehensive map of the soul's journey ever provided to humanity. This map reveals that your current personality is just the tip of the iceberg of who you really are. Your soul carries memories, wisdom, talents, and connections spanning thousands of years and multiple lifetimes. The fears that seem irrational, the talents that come naturally, the people you feel instantly connected to, the places that feel like home, all of these are threads in the tapestry of your soul's eternal journey. But here's the most important understanding that emerges from Cayce's revelation. Your soul chose to be here now. It prepared for this lifetime through previous incarnations and spiritual sojourns. It selected your circumstances, your challenges, and your opportunities as the perfect curriculum for your next stage of growth. And it's counting on you to recognize the magnificent journey you're on and step fully into the role you came here to play. The question isn't whether you have a purpose. According to Edgar Cayce's revelations, every soul incarnates with specific gifts to offer and specific lessons to learn. The question is whether you'll awaken to that purpose and begin consciously participating in the soul's eternal journey toward reunion with the divine. As Cayce himself said in one of his most profound readings, the soul seeks to know itself to be itself, yet one with the creative forces. That is the ultimate destination of every soul's journey, not just personal enlightenment, but conscious co-creation with the divine in the ongoing evolution of all life. This understanding transforms every aspect of human existence. Death is not an ending, but a transition to another phase of learning and service. Relationships are not random encounters, but carefully orchestrated opportunities for mutual growth. Challenges are not punishments, but precisely chosen curriculum for soul development, and life itself becomes not a series of random events, but a magnificent spiritual adventure, carefully planned by your own soul for the highest good of all. This is your real journey. This is your soul's magnificent adventure. And now that you understand the map, the question remains, how will you choose to navigate the path ahead? How will you honor the wisdom your soul has gained across multiple lifetimes? How will you contribute to the collective awakening that your soul group came here to facilitate? The same cosmic intelligence that guided Edgar Cayce to access the Akashic records is available to guide you in understanding your own soul's journey. Through meditation, dream work, and conscious spiritual practice, you can begin to access your own deep memories, understand your soul's purpose, and align your current life with the magnificent destiny your soul chose before you were born. Your soul's real journey is not a mystery to be solved someday in the future. It's a reality to be lived, consciously and purposefully, right now. Every moment offers an opportunity to align with your soul's deeper wisdom. Every relationship provides a chance to heal old karma or create new bonds of spiritual service. Every challenge becomes a stepping stone toward greater spiritual mastery. This is the gift that Edgar Cayce, Arthur Lammers, Gladys Davis, and countless others preserve for us through their dedication to documenting and sharing these profound insights. The soul's real journey is not just a beautiful spiritual concept. It's the fundamental reality of your existence, waiting for you to recognize it, embrace it, and live it fully. In one of his most striking readings from the early 1930s, Edgar Cayce warned that humanity's greatest struggle would not be fought on battlefields. He described a war of spirit, an Armageddon, where light and darkness would battle for the future of every soul. For those who heard his words, the shock was immediate. People had come to Cayce searching for cures, guidance, or answers about their personal lives, but what he delivered was a vision that stretched far beyond one person's struggles. It was a warning for humanity as a whole. In that moment, he shifted the conversation from the physical to the eternal, from temporary concerns to the destiny of the soul. And what he revealed still speaks directly to us today. Because every one of us, in ways both seen and unseen, is already standing on that battlefield. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll mark every comment with a little heart. Cayce's description of Armageddon was never about armies clashing under a sky of fire. Instead, he said the greatest battles are fought within consciousness itself. In his readings, he often reminded seekers that humanity is constantly choosing between forces that elevate the soul and those that bind it to suffering. He spoke of light as the awareness of God's presence and darkness as the forgetfulness of that connection. Armageddon, in his terms, is not somewhere out there, but a condition in which our collective choices determine the course of human history. When people think of end times, they often imagine destruction, chaos, and loss. But for Cayce, the true end was not the end of the world. It was the end of ignorance, the breaking point where humanity would be forced to awaken or collapse under the weight of its own shadows. This reframing changes everything. Instead of fearing prophecies of doom, Cayce invited us to see Armageddon as an opportunity for profound transformation. In one session that touched a family deeply, Cayce explained that the struggles they faced were reflections of the larger battle of light and darkness. What seemed like personal misfortune was also part of a collective shift, as if each individual life mirrored the condition of the world. This perspective was both unsettling and liberating. It meant that no one was exempt from the responsibility of choosing light, but it also meant that each small act of love, forgiveness, or faith contributed to the tipping of the scales. He emphasized again and again the choices made in daily life. How we treat others, how we use our thoughts, how we direct our intentions are not insignificant. They are the very weapons and shields in this spiritual war. For Cayce, Armageddon was less about prophecy and more about preparation, the preparation of the soul for alignment with divine purpose. And this preparation was not limited to saints or mystics. It was demanded of everyone. During the 1930s, people listening to Cayce were already carrying the burdens of uncertainty. Economic collapse had shaken their sense of stability, and whispers of global conflict were growing louder. It was in this climate of fear that Cayce reminded them that the most dangerous collapse was not financial or political, but spiritual. He said the true danger was when humanity abandoned its connection to God and allowed selfishness, greed, and hatred to dominate its decisions. This, he warned, was the breeding ground for darkness. Yet even as he gave these sobering warnings, Cayce offered hope. He spoke of a future in which light could prevail. not because it would crush darkness through violence, but because it would outshine it through collective awakening. He urged individuals to pray, to meditate, to live with integrity, and to extend compassion even in the smallest ways. For him, every soul was both a soldier and a prize in this battle. And in the silence of his trances, he saw that this war was already unfolding in ways too subtle for newspapers or history books to capture. Cayce often described this spiritual Armageddon as a test of humanity's collective maturity. He saw it not as punishment, but as the inevitable result of the seeds sown by human thought and action. Just as individuals must eventually face the consequences of their choices, civilizations too reach a point where they must confront what they have created. In several readings, he pointed to the growing unrest in the world as evidence that humanity was standing at a crossroads. He explained that societies built on selfishness, division, and disregard for spiritual truth would eventually collapse under their own weight. But he also reassured his listeners that collapse was not the end. It was the opportunity to rebuild on stronger foundations, guided by principles of light. The crucial factor, he emphasized, was whether people would awaken to their spiritual identity in time. This awakening would not come from fear, but from recognition that each person carries within them the spark of the divine. One of the most striking aspects of Cayce's warnings is how personal he made them. He did not simply speak of humanity in the abstract. Instead, he told individuals that their thoughts, emotions, and daily choices were threads woven into the destiny of the entire world. In one reading, he urged the seeker to understand that every act of kindness contributes to the victory of light, while every moment of resentment or hatred strengthens the darkness. This was not meant to instill guilt, but responsibility. Cayce wanted people to recognize the immense power they carried, even in the ordinary routines of life. To him, Armageddon was not fought in temples or palaces, but in kitchens, workplaces, and quiet prayers offered at night. It was in the decision to forgive rather than to condemn, to give rather than to hoard, to trust rather than to despair. Through these choices, the balance of the world was being determined, moment by moment. Cayce also warned that the forces of darkness were subtle, often hiding in the very areas where people least expected them. He said that darkness is not only found in acts of violence or obvious cruelty. More often, it creeps into the heart through indifference, complacency, or the quiet acceptance of injustice. This is why he insisted that vigilance was necessary, not against enemies outside, but against the shadows that try to nest inside our own hearts. He called for practices of prayer and meditation, not as rituals of tradition, but as tools of clarity and strength in this war. By quieting the mind and turning inward, people could align with the divine light that no darkness could overcome. In doing so, they became both warriors and beacons, shining in ways that influenced not just their own lives but the collective consciousness of the planet. For Cayce, silence was not weakness. It was the ground on which the soul gathered its strength to face the unseen battle. This teaching was radical in its simplicity. While many looked for dramatic signs of the end, Cayce reminded them that the true signs were already visible in their relationships, their communities, and the movements of their own minds. He urged people to stop waiting for an external event and instead recognize that the war of spirit was already in progress. Every moment of division, every eruption of hatred, every system built on exploitation was evidence of darkness pressing forward. But just as surely, every moment of compassion, every reconciliation, every selfless act was evidence of light prevailing. The outcome was not predetermined. It was being written in real time by humanity's collective choices. This is why Cayce's words remain urgent even today. We may not see armies on a battlefield, but the evidence of the struggle is everywhere. And if his vision was correct, the future of humanity's soul depends on which side we strengthen with our thoughts and actions. Cayce often described this spiritual Armageddon as a test of humanity's collective maturity. He saw it not as punishment, but as the inevitable result of the seeds sown by human thought and action. Just as individuals must eventually face the consequences of their choices, civilizations too reach a point where they must confront what they have created. In several readings, he pointed to the growing unrest in the world as evidence that humanity was standing at a crossroads. He explained that societies built on selfishness, division, and disregard for spiritual truth would eventually collapse under their own weight. But he also reassured his listeners that collapse was not the end. It was the opportunity to rebuild on stronger foundations, guided by principles of light. The crucial factor, he emphasized, was whether people would awaken to their spiritual identity in time. This awakening would not come from fear, but from recognition that each person carries within them the spark of the divine. One of the most striking aspects of Cayce's warnings is how personal he made them. He did not simply speak of humanity in the abstract. Instead, he told individuals that their thoughts, emotions, and daily choices were threads woven into the destiny of the entire world. In one reading, he urged the seeker to understand that every act of kindness contributes to the victory of light, while every moment of resentment or hatred strengthens the darkness. This was not meant to instill guilt, but responsibility. Cayce wanted people to recognize the immense power they carried, even in the ordinary routines of life. To him, Armageddon was not fought in temples or palaces, but in kitchens, workplaces, and quiet prayers offered at night. It was in the decision to forgive rather than to condemn, to give rather than to hoard, to trust rather than to despair. Through these choices, the balance of the world was being determined moment by moment. Cayce also warned that the forces of darkness were subtle, often hiding in the very areas where people least expected them. He said that darkness is not only found in acts of violence or obvious cruelty. More often it creeps into the heart through indifference, complacency, or the quiet acceptance of injustice. This is why he insisted that vigilance was necessary, not against enemies outside, but against the shadows that try to nest inside our own hearts. He called for practices of prayer and meditation not as rituals of tradition, but as tools of clarity and strength in this war. By quieting the mind and turning inward, people could align with the divine light that no darkness could overcome. In doing so, they became both warriors and beacons, shining in ways that influenced not just their own lives, but the collective consciousness of the planet. For Cayce, silence was not weakness. It was the ground on which the soul gathered its strength to face the unseen battle. This teaching was radical in its simplicity. While many looked for dramatic signs of the end, Cayce reminded them that the true signs were already visible in their relationships, their communities, and the movements of their own minds. He urged people to stop waiting for an external event and instead recognize that the war of spirit was already in progress. Every moment of division, every eruption of hatred, every system built on exploitation was evidence of darkness pressing forward. But just as surely, every moment of compassion, every reconciliation, every selfless act was evidence of light prevailing. The outcome was not predetermined. It was being written in real time by humanity's collective choices. This is why Cayce's words remain urgent even today. We may not see armies on a battlefield, but the evidence of the struggle is everywhere, and if his vision was correct, the future of humanity's soul depends on which side we strengthen with our thoughts and actions. In several of his readings, Cayce described Armageddon as both a prophecy and a process. He explained that it would unfold not only on a global scale, but also within the individual soul. This dual dimension was key. Humanity would see unrest in nations, shifts in the earth itself, and conflicts that seemed impossible to resolve, but beneath all of that, the true battle would be spiritual. He warned that these outer events were reflections of inner struggles, a mirror showing humanity what it had allowed to grow within. In one of his most discussed sessions, he noted that the great Armageddon will be fought in the minds of men. These words carried a profound weight. Instead of a cataclysm outside, he pointed to a war in thought, intention, and awareness. For those who listened, it meant that their inner lives were not private matters alone. They were connected to the destiny of the world. This insight shook many people who had come expecting predictions of earthquakes or wars, and instead were told the greatest danger was the state of their own consciousness. Cayce also connected this vision of Armageddon to the larger cycles of soul evolution. He often spoke of humanity as being in a stage of testing, much like a student facing the final exam after years of preparation. The lessons of patience, forgiveness, and faith that individuals had been learning throughout lifetimes were now being gathered together for a decisive moment. If enough souls chose light, the collective consciousness of the earth would shift toward a new age of harmony. If too many chose darkness, the result would be suffering and delay in humanity's spiritual progress. He was careful to emphasize that prophecy was not destiny. The readings consistently reminded seekers that free will is the determining factor. The warnings about Armageddon were not predictions carved in stone, but calls to responsibility. They were invitations to awaken and choose. And this message still echoes powerfully. The future is not fixed. It is created by what we decide individually and together each day. In his language, light was never abstract. It was the living awareness of God moving through every act of compassion, every honest prayer, every choice to serve others above oneself. Darkness, on the other hand, was not merely evil as people often imagine it. It was forgetfulness, the turning away from divine truth, the acceptance of fear and separation as ultimate reality. Cayce explained that when people live as if they are cut off from God and from each other, they feed the forces of darkness. When they remember their true identity as souls created in the image of the divine, they strengthen the forces of light. The choice, therefore, was not only moral, but metaphysical. Each thought carried energy. Each word was creative. Each action rippled outward into the unseen. Armageddon was simply the culmination of these countless choices, brought to a breaking point where the soul and humanity itself could no longer remain divided. For those who came to him during times of despair, this message was both sobering and empowering. It meant that no government, no army, no scientific breakthrough could resolve the crisis at hand if humanity did not first resolve the war within itself. But it also meant that ordinary people, often feeling powerless in the face of global events, actually held the keys to transformation. A single act of forgiveness could weigh more heavily than 1,000 acts of hatred. A community committed to prayer and service could shift the balance of darkness in ways unseen. Cayce invited each listener to stop asking when the world would change and start asking how they themselves could change. The battlefield of Armageddon was not in some distant land. It was in the heart, in the home, in the moment of decision. And he assured them that divine help was always present for those who sought it, for the light of God was never absent, only ignored. Cayce was consistent in urging people not to wait for grand events, but to begin cultivating light in the most ordinary details of daily life. In his readings, he gave simple but profound practices: prayer at sunrise to align the mind with divine purpose, meditation to quiet the restless thoughts that often feed fear, acts of service to remind the heart of its unity with others, and forgiveness as a weapon more powerful than any sword. These were not optional suggestions for a few. They were, in his view, the training ground for the soul. Each of these practices weakened the grip of darkness and allowed the presence of God to flow more freely through human life. When asked how to prepare for the trials ahead, Cayce repeatedly brought seekers back to the same truth: prepare by choosing light in every moment. He said that every soul who learns to master their inner storms contributes to calming the storms of the world. In other words, world peace begins not with treaties but with the healing of the heart. One of his most profound statements about Armageddon was that the kingdom of heaven is built one act of kindness at a time. This reframed the entire concept of prophecy. Instead of fearing a predetermined apocalypse, Cayce taught that humanity was building its future brick by brick, choice by choice. He compared the collective consciousness of humanity to a great river. Every thought, word, and action poured into it like streams of water. When people acted from love, they poured clear water. When they acted from hatred or fear, they poured mud. The river would eventually overflow, carrying whatever it contained into the future. The question was whether it would carry life or poison. This image struck listeners deeply because it made the invisible visible. It showed them that their lives mattered far beyond their own immediate circle, and that Armageddon was not an event to dread, but a call to take responsibility for the river they were helping to fill. In sessions with individuals struggling with illness or loss, Cayce would often turn their attention back to the larger battle of the spirit. He told them that physical healing was important, but even more critical was the healing of the soul. The body would one day perish, but the choices made in the heart and mind would echo in eternity. He spoke of the armor of light that every soul could wear: faith, patience, love, and service. These, he said, were stronger than any weapon and more lasting than any earthly security. People left those sessions not only with medical advice or guidance for their problems, but with a sense of mission. They felt that their personal struggles were part of something cosmic, that their suffering had meaning when offered in love, and that their victory over fear or despair was a victory for humanity as a whole. It gave them the courage to face hardships not as victims, but as participants in a divine drama. Even today, when we read these words in the archives of the ARE, the message feels uncannily relevant. The world is filled with conflict, division, and uncertainty. Many feel as if darkness is winning, yet Cayce's vision reminds us that the measure of victory is not in headlines, but in the unseen choices of the soul. The struggle of light and darkness is not over nations, but over human consciousness itself. And here lies the hope. Light does not need to destroy darkness, it only needs to shine. A single candle is enough to pierce a room full of shadows. Multiply that by millions of souls choosing light, and the course of history changes. Cayce's call was not to fear Armageddon, but to embrace it as the great opportunity to awaken. He insisted that the outcome was not fixed, that humanity's destiny was still being written, and that every person listening had a pen in their hand. The war is real, but the victory belongs to those who remember who they truly are. Cayce often looked beyond the struggle itself and spoke of what lay on the other side of Armageddon. He described a time when the consciousness of humanity would shift, when cooperation would replace conflict, and when nations would recognize their unity under God rather than their divisions. This was not a utopia born of human effort alone, but the natural outcome of aligning with divine law. He said that once the forces of darkness were exposed and overcome in the hearts of people, light would flood the earth in ways never seen before. He envisioned a future where spiritual truth would no longer be hidden or denied, but lived openly in every aspect of human life: education, medicine, government, and community. For many, these promises sounded almost impossible, yet Cayce reminded them that every great transformation in history was once considered impossible, until people chose differently. The same, he said, was true for this battle. Victory would not come suddenly, but as the accumulation of millions of daily choices for light. In one reading that deeply moved those present, Cayce explained that the triumph of light would not appear first in global institutions, but in the renewal of the individual heart. Families that once lived in conflict would discover peace through forgiveness. Communities divided by suspicion would rediscover unity through service. Nations exhausted by war would turn to healing rather than conquest. He did not promise perfection, but a decisive shift, a tipping point in consciousness where the scales would no longer be dominated by fear. To him, this was the true meaning of prophecy, not predicting doom but preparing for possibility. He told seekers that if enough souls chose light, the prophecies of destruction could be softened, even transformed. Free will, he emphasized, is the hand that writes the future. And with that truth, he placed the responsibility directly in the hands of those listening. No one could say they had no part to play. Everyone was a participant in the destiny of the world. The power of Cayce's words rests in their balance of warning and hope. He never minimized the seriousness of the struggle. He acknowledged that darkness was real, that suffering was real, that humanity could destroy itself if it persisted in greed, division, and ignorance. But he also pointed with equal force to the reality of light, reminding people that no darkness is permanent, and that every shadow is scattered by even the smallest ray of truth. This dual vision kept his message from being dismissed as either naive optimism or empty fear-mongering. Instead, it carried the weight of reality. Life is hard, choices matter, and the struggle is ongoing, but also the certainty that light is stronger than darkness if we choose it. For those who sat in his presence in Hopkinsville, Virginia Beach, or other places where he gave readings, the impact was unforgettable. They left not with despair, but with a burning sense of mission, to live as bearers of light in a world that desperately needed it. That mission extends to us today. The Armageddon Cayce described is not finished. The evidence of the struggle is in the news, in our communities, and even in our own minds. Each time fear rises, each time hatred tempts, each time despair whispers that nothing can change, we are standing at the crossroads he spoke of. And each time we choose faith over fear, compassion over hatred, and hope over despair, we tip the balance toward light. It may seem small, but Cayce insisted that it is precisely in these small choices that the destiny of humanity is decided. He warned that waiting for others to change, or for some dramatic sign in the heavens, was a mistake. The sign is already here. It is in our lives, our decisions, our willingness to live as children of light. And so the call is urgent, but it is also filled with hope. The war is real, the stakes are eternal, and the opportunity is now. Cayce's vision of a spiritual Armageddon was not just about the struggle itself, but about awakening to the tools we already carry within us. In his readings, he constantly reminded people that the soul is eternal and that no amount of darkness can erase the divine spark placed within. This truth, he said, was the ultimate weapon of light, remembering who we are. When people forget, when they live as if they are only flesh and circumstance, they become vulnerable to despair. But when they remember that they are souls with an eternal purpose, the shadows lose their grip. In many ways, Cayce's teachings were less about predicting the future and more about equipping humanity for the present. He urged individuals to cultivate practices of prayer, meditation, forgiveness, and service not as religious duties, but as shields in the invisible war. Every one of these practices realigned the heart with divine law and ensured that, no matter how fierce the battle became, the soul would stand secure in the light. The practical implications of this message were enormous. People often asked Cayce, "What can I do? How can one person make a difference in a world that feels lost?" His answers were always grounded in the same truth: start where you are. A simple act of kindness in your home, an honest word spoken in love at work, a prayer lifted for someone in need. All these things, he said, echo far beyond what the eye can see. They are seeds of light planted in the field of human consciousness. Some may sprout quickly, others may seem invisible, but together they shift the balance of the entire world. He warned against waiting for leaders, systems, or miracles to do what each individual was called to do. The transformation begins in the soul and radiates outward. This decentralization of responsibility was both unsettling and liberating. It meant no one could escape the battle, but it also meant no one was powerless. Every person mattered. Every choice counted. And perhaps this is why Cayce's message about Armageddon resonates so strongly even now. In an age of constant information, global crises, and uncertainty, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or insignificant. Yet Cayce's words cut through the noise with clarity. You are not powerless, and the true war is not outside of you, it is within. What you do with your thoughts, your words, your daily decisions is shaping not only your destiny but the destiny of humanity. This was not meant as a burden, but as an invitation. Imagine the hope that comes from knowing your smallest act of love is part of a divine plan, that your faith contributes to the victory of light, that your refusal to give in to despair is a weapon against the darkness pressing in on the world. Cayce's vision removes the illusion that only great leaders or dramatic events change history. He places the pen in every hand and says, the story is still being written. So what does this mean for us today? It means that Armageddon is not some far-off event waiting to erupt. It is unfolding in our lives right now. Every time you choose compassion over cruelty, forgiveness over resentment, truth over lies, you are fighting in the war of light. Every time you surrender to fear, hatred, or despair, you strengthen the shadows. The choice is constant, but so is the opportunity. Cayce promised that divine help is always near, that no soul stands alone in this battle. He pointed again and again to Christ as the perfect example of how light conquers darkness, not by violence, but by love that does not break, by faith that does not fail, by service that does not end. This, he said, is the pattern for victory, and it is available to each of us here and now. If these words resonate with you, let them be more than just information. Let them be a call to live differently, Begin today by asking yourself, in this moment, am I choosing light or darkness? Am I contributing to healing or division, hope or despair? These are the questions that matter, because in the end, Armageddon is not about the destruction of the world, it is about the transformation of the soul. And if Cayce was right, then every small act of faith, every prayer, every step toward compassion is not only shaping your eternity, but contributing to the survival and awakening of humanity itself. That is the challenge, and that is the promise. If you believe this message carries truth, share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below telling me how you are choosing light in your life. I'll mark every single one with a heart. What if America's greatest psychic warned us 70 years ago about the exact spiritual crisis we're living through today? Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, gave over 14,000 documented readings that predicted a massive spiritual awakening would only come after what he called the great spiritual collapse of humanity. And according to his readings, we are living through that collapse right now. I'm going to show you 3 shocking revelations from Cayce's documented readings that prove we're in the middle of the spiritual transformation he saw coming decades ago. You'll discover the specific reading where he described our current crisis, the exact signs he said would appear before humanity's spiritual awakening, and the incredible healing methods he revealed that are more relevant today than ever before. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like something fundamental is breaking down in our world? Like we're losing touch with what really matters? If you have, you're not alone, and Edgar Cayce predicted you'd feel exactly this way. In Reading 3976-15, given in 1944, Cayce described a time when man's spiritual nature would be at its lowest ebb before the dawn of the New Age. He saw a period when materialism would reach such extremes that people would feel spiritually empty, despite having more material wealth than any generation in history. Does this sound familiar? But wait, there's something even more specific that will shock you. Cayce didn't just predict general spiritual decline. In Reading 1602-3, he described exactly what we're seeing today. A generation that would have access to infinite information, but would struggle to find wisdom. People who could communicate instantly across the globe, but would feel more isolated than ever. And a society where ancient spiritual practices would suddenly resurface as people desperately searched for meaning. Here's what Cayce revealed in Reading 57494 that changes everything about how we understand our current moment. He said, "The periods of the greater spiritual awakening come only after the periods of the greater spiritual darkness. According to his readings, we had to go through this collapse for humanity to evolve to its next spiritual level." Think about it. We're living in an era where depression and anxiety rates are at historic highs, despite unprecedented material prosperity. Suicide rates are climbing. People are more connected digitally, but feel more spiritually disconnected than ever. Traditional religious institutions are losing members while interest in meditation, crystals, and alternative healing is exploding. This isn't random chaos. This is exactly what Edgar Cayce saw coming. But here's where it gets really interesting, and I'll show you the documented case that proves Cayce's accuracy about spiritual timing. In 1943, a businessman from Ohio came to Cayce feeling spiritually lost despite his material success. In Life Reading 24/751, Cayce told him that his spiritual emptiness was not a personal failing, but part of a massive collective experience that humanity had to go through. The man was living through what Cayce called the Great Forgetting that would precede the Great Remembering. This changes everything about consciousness and how we understand our current spiritual crisis. Cayce's readings suggest that what feels like spiritual collapse is actually spiritual labor pains. We're not falling apart. We're being reborn. Now you might be wondering, what specific signs did Cayce say would mark this transition period? In Reading 3976-29, he outlined 7 clear indicators, and when you hear them, you'll realize we're checking every box. First, he said there would be a massive increase in what he called psychic sensitivity among ordinary people. More people would report dreams that come true, intuitive experiences, and what we now call synchronicities. Have you noticed this happening around you? The explosion of interest in astrology, tarot, and psychic phenomena isn't just a trend. According to Cayce, it's evidence that humanity's spiritual receptors are turning back on. Second, Cayce predicted that ancient healing methods would resurface and gain scientific validation. Today we see acupuncture in hospitals, meditation prescribed by doctors, and energy healing techniques being studied by major universities. In Reading 69-1, Cayce specifically said that the healing methods he was revealing would not be fully accepted until the time of the Great Spiritual Awakening. But wait, here's the reading that shocked even Cayce's stenographer, Gladys Davis. In reading 1152-11, given in 1936, Cayce described technology that wouldn't exist for decades, but would play a crucial role in the spiritual awakening. He talked about devices that would allow instantaneous communication across vast distances, and said these same technologies would initially increase spiritual disconnection before ultimately serving spiritual reconnection. Think about social media and the internet. They've created unprecedented isolation and comparison, leading millions to seek deeper spiritual meaning. The very technology that contributed to our spiritual crisis is now being used to spread ancient wisdom teachings, meditation apps, and spiritual communities. Cayce saw this paradox coming almost 90 years ago. The third sign Cayce predicted was what he called the Great Seeking. In Reading 262-87, he said there would come a time when people would search desperately for spiritual truth, trying everything from ancient traditions to New Age practices. Sound familiar? We're living through the exact spiritual seeking behavior Cayce described. Here's a documented healing case that proves Cayce's connection to higher consciousness and validates his predictions about our current time. In 1943, a woman named Helen came to Cayce with what doctors had diagnosed as incurable arthritis. She could barely walk and was in constant pain. In Physical Reading 1968-7, Cayce prescribed a specific combination of treatments, including castor oil packs, dietary changes, and spinal adjustments. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. Cayce told Helen that her healing would be complete in 18 months, and that her recovery would serve as a sign to others during the coming time of spiritual darkness and renewal. Helen followed Cayce's readings exactly, and her arthritis completely disappeared within the predicted time frame. But the really amazing part came 20 years later. Helen became a healer herself, using the methods Cayce had taught her. During the 1960s spiritual awakening, she helped hundreds of people heal using Cayce's techniques. Her case files, preserved in the Association for Research and Enlightenment archives in Virginia Beach, show that her healing work accelerated dramatically during the exact period Cayce had predicted the spiritual seeking would intensify. This reveals something profound about how Cayce's readings work. He wasn't just giving individual guidance, he was planting seeds for the collective spiritual awakening he knew was coming. Now, here's where Cayce's predictions get really specific about our current moment. And this will change how you see everything happening in the world today. In Reading 3976-26, Cayce described what he called the period of purification that would precede the spiritual awakening. He said this period would be marked by the exposure of corruption in institutions people trusted, the collapse of systems that seemed permanent, and what he called the great revealing of hidden things. Does this sound like the world we're living in? Scandals in religious institutions, political upheaval, economic uncertainty, and a constant stream of revelations about corruption in systems we thought we could trust. According to Cayce, this isn't the end of civilization. It's the necessary clearing away of false foundations so something authentic can be built. But wait, there's something even more hopeful in Cayce's readings that most people don't know about. In Reading 1602-6, he specifically addressed people living during this transition period. He said, "Those who incarnate during the time of the great spiritual collapse and awakening have chosen to be here. They are the souls who have prepared for lifetimes to assist in humanity's spiritual evolution. If you're drawn to spiritual growth, if you feel called to heal yourself and others, if you're searching for deeper meaning despite the chaos around you, Cayce's readings suggest you chose to be here during this exact time period. You're not a victim of spiritual collapse. You're a participant in spiritual renaissance. Here's a documented case from the Association for Research and Enlightenment files that proves this point. In 1944, a young woman named Patricia received Life Reading 2392. Cayce told her she had incarnated specifically to help others navigate the coming spiritual transition. He said her own spiritual struggles in this lifetime were preparation for the healing work she would do as humanity went through its spiritual crisis. Patricia initially dismissed the reading. She was struggling with depression and felt anything but spiritually gifted. But over the following decades, as the spiritual seeking Cayce predicted intensified, Patricia found herself naturally drawn to helping others find spiritual meaning. She became a counselor, then a spiritual teacher, and eventually founded a healing center that helped thousands of people during their own spiritual crises. What's remarkable is that Patricia's story is not unique. The ARE archives contain dozens of similar cases of people who received readings about their role in the coming spiritual awakening, initially doubted their abilities, but later found themselves naturally stepping into healing and teaching roles as the spiritual crisis deepened. This suggests something incredible about the timing of souls incarnating on Earth. According to Cayce's readings, many of the people alive today specifically chose to be here during humanity's spiritual transformation. Now here's the reading that reveals exactly where we are in this process and what comes next. In reading 397615, Cayce outlined 3 phases of the spiritual transition. Phase 1 was the Great Forgetting, where humanity would become obsessed with material progress while losing touch with spiritual reality. Phase 2 was the Great Seeking, where the spiritual emptiness would become so painful that people would desperately search for meaning. Phase 3 is the Great Remembering, where humanity would rediscover its spiritual nature, but with a new level of consciousness. According to the timeline in Cayce's readings, we're right at the transition between Phase 2 and Phase 3. The seeking has reached critical mass. Now comes the remembering. But here's what Cayce said would trigger the shift from seeking to remembering, and this will give you chills. In reading 26287, he said the transformation would accelerate when enough individuals began using the spiritual principles he revealed in his readings. Not talking about them, not just believing in them, but actually applying them in daily life. This is why Cayce's healing methods are more relevant now than ever. He didn't just predict our spiritual crisis, he provided the tools to navigate through it. Let me share a documented healing case that shows how powerful these tools are in our current environment. In 2019, a software engineer named David was struggling with severe anxiety and insomnia, conditions that have become epidemic in our hyper-connected world. Traditional treatments weren't helping. Desperate, he found Cayce's readings about healing anxiety through meditation, dietary changes, and castor oil packs. David followed the protocols exactly as Cayce described them in readings like 5414-1 and 47037. Within 3 months, his anxiety had decreased dramatically. Within 6 months, he was sleeping normally for the first time in years. But here's the really interesting part. As David healed, he began having the kind of intuitive experiences Cayce said would increase during the spiritual awakening. He started having prophetic dreams, developed healing abilities, and found himself naturally counseling friends through their spiritual crises. David's transformation from anxious software engineer to intuitive healer follows the exact pattern Cayce described for individuals during the spiritual awakening. Personal healing leads to expanded consciousness, which leads to service to others, which accelerates the collective awakening. This is happening thousands of times over as people rediscover Cayce's teachings and apply them to modern spiritual challenges. Here's something that will change how you think about your own spiritual journey. In reading 1537-1, Cayce explained that every person who heals themselves during this transition period creates what he called a vibrational lighthouse that helps others find their way through the spiritual darkness. Your personal spiritual growth isn't just about you, it's contributing to humanity's collective awakening. Now let me show you the most hopeful prediction in all of Cayce's readings about our current time. In reading 3976-29, he described what he called the New Age that would emerge after the spiritual collapse and awakening. This wasn't about astrology or New Age spirituality, as we think of it today. Cayce was describing a time when humanity would integrate spiritual wisdom with practical living in unprecedented ways. He predicted that during this new era, healing would become more art than science. With practitioners using intuition alongside medical knowledge, education would include spiritual development as naturally as it includes reading and writing. Business and economics would be based on service rather than pure profit. And most remarkably, he said that psychic abilities would be as common and accepted as any other human talent. Does this seem impossible given our current world? Here's what Cayce said in reading 25468 that changes everything. He explained that the transition to this new consciousness wouldn't happen through external revolution, but through internal evolution. As enough individuals raise their consciousness, the collective consciousness of humanity automatically shifts. We're seeing early signs of this everywhere. Meditation is taught in schools and corporations. Energy healing is entering mainstream healthcare. Business leaders are talking about purpose alongside profit. What Cayce called impossible in the 1940s is becoming normal today. But here's the key insight from Cayce's readings that most people miss. In reading 84945, he explained that this spiritual awakening wouldn't happen to humanity. It would happen through humanity, person by person, choice by choice, healing by healing. Every time you choose spiritual growth over material obsession, you're participating in the awakening Cayce predicted. Every time you use meditation, prayer, or energy healing to transform your life, you're proving the reality of the consciousness shift he described. Every time you help another person find spiritual meaning, you're accelerating the collective transformation. Here's a documented case that proves how individual spiritual development contributes to collective awakening. The ARE. Archives contain detailed records of what researchers call the ripple effect of Cayce's readings. When someone applies Cayce's spiritual principles and experiences transformation, they typically influence an average of 12 other people to explore similar practices. Those 12 people each influence others, creating exponential expansion of spiritual consciousness. This ripple effect has been documented since the 1960s and has accelerated dramatically in recent decades. What started with a few thousand people studying Cayce's readings has now influenced millions of Americans to explore meditation, energy healing, reincarnation, and other spiritual concepts that were considered fringe when Cayce first presented them. This is exactly how Cayce said the spiritual awakening would spread, not through mass conversion or dramatic external events, but through individual transformation, creating expanding circles of influence. Now here's what Cayce's readings reveal about your role in this process, and this might be the most important thing you'll hear today. In reading 3976-8, Cayce explained that everyone alive during the transition period has what he called awakening potential. This means that regardless of your current spiritual development, you have the capacity to experience the consciousness expansion that defines this new era. But here's the catch. Cayce said this potential would only activate through what he called applied spirituality. Reading about spiritual concepts, believing in higher consciousness, even having psychic experiences wouldn't be enough. The awakening happens through consistent practice of spiritual principles in daily life. This is why Cayce emphasized practical spirituality in his readings. Meditation isn't just about inner peace. It's about developing the consciousness needed for the new era. Prayer isn't just about asking for help. It's about aligning with the divine intelligence that guides planetary evolution. Healing work isn't just about fixing problems. It's about demonstrating the power of consciousness over physical reality. Every spiritual practice you do with sincere intention contributes to the collective awakening Cayce predicted. Here's the final revelation from Cayce's readings that ties everything together. In reading 3976-29, given in 1944, Cayce made a specific prediction about timing. He said the spiritual awakening would reach what he called critical mass when enough individuals had proven through their own lives that spiritual principles actually work in practical application. According to his calculations, this critical mass would be reached in the early part of the 21st century. We're living in that exact time frame right now. This means that your spiritual development isn't just personal growth. It's your contribution to a planetary transformation that Edgar Cayce saw coming 80 years ago. Every meditation session, every healing you experience, every moment of spiritual insight you gain is helping tip the collective consciousness toward the awakening he predicted. The spiritual collapse Edgar Cayce predicted isn't something happening to us. It's something we're moving through on our way to unprecedented spiritual evolution. And according to his readings, the individuals who recognize this truth and act on it will become the leaders and healers of the new consciousness that's emerging. The question isn't whether Cayce's predicted spiritual awakening will happen. According to his readings, it's already happening through people like you who are drawn to understand these truths and apply them in your life. The question is how quickly you'll claim your role in the transformation he saw coming, and how much you'll contribute to helping others navigate their own spiritual awakening. The spiritual collapse was never the end of the story. It was always the beginning of something extraordinary, and you're here right now to be part of it.
What if I told you that your depression isn't just a chemical imbalance, but your soul crying out for spiritual awakening? Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, revealed in over 14,000 readings that depression often signals a profound spiritual crisis that modern medicine completely misses. Before we continue, it's essential to understand that Edgar Cayce's spiritual insights are meant to complement, never replace, professional medical care. If you're experiencing depression, please seek qualified medical attention. These teachings offer spiritual perspective alongside proper health care. Before we dive into these life-changing revelations, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to discover will transform how you understand consciousness, healing, and your soul's journey. And please, share your own experiences with spiritual awakening in the comments below. In the next 20 minutes, I'll reveal 3 shocking discoveries from Cayce's documented readings. First, why depression is often your higher self demanding attention. Second, the specific karmic patterns that create recurring depression. And third, the exact spiritual practices Cayce prescribed that healed thousands of people right here in America. But wait, there's something even more profound coming. In just 3 minutes, I'll share the reading that made Cayce's stenographer stop typing in absolute shock. Edgar Cayce, working from his clinic in Virginia Beach, Virginia, entered deep trance states and accessed what he called the Akashic Records, the cosmic library of every soul's journey. Between 1901 and 1944, he gave readings that would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, and nowhere is this more evident than in his approach to depression. Here's what changes everything about how we view mental health. In reading 1537-1, Cayce revealed that depression isn't a disease, it's a spiritual emergency. He explained that when our soul's purpose becomes disconnected from our daily existence, the psyche rebels through what we call depression. Think of it like this. Your soul is a radio trying to tune into a specific frequency, but your mind is creating so much static that the signal gets lost. That static is depression. But here's where it gets shocking. Cayce discovered that many cases of chronic depression were actually past life memories bleeding through into present consciousness. In documented reading 2067-1, he described a woman whose severe depression stemmed from unresolved guilt from a previous incarnation, where she had abandoned her children during a plague in medieval Europe. The woman had come to Cayce's clinic in Virginia Beach completely skeptical, having tried every conventional treatment available in 1934. But when Cayce accessed her Akashic records, he revealed specific details about her past life that no one could have known, including the exact location of a monastery where she had sought refuge. This changes everything about consciousness, doesn't it? Now you might be thinking, how can past lives affect my current mental state? Here's what Cayce revealed in reading 254-68 that shocked even his stenographer. He explained that the soul carries emotional imprints from lifetime to lifetime, and these imprints create what he called karmic patterns that manifest as recurring depression, anxiety, and spiritual emptiness. But wait, there's more. Cayce discovered that depression often occurs at specific spiritual crossroads in our lives. In reading 1472-1, he described how depression frequently signals that we're ready for a major spiritual breakthrough, but our ego consciousness is resisting the transformation. Let me share a documented case that will blow your mind. In 1938, a successful businessman from New York came to Cayce's clinic, experiencing what doctors today would call severe clinical depression. He had lost interest in everything, felt completely disconnected from life, and was considering ending it all. During his life reading, Cayce revealed that this man's soul had chosen this particular incarnation to serve others, but he had become so focused on material success that he had completely ignored his spiritual calling. The depression was his soul's way of forcing him to pay attention. Here's what happened next that amazed everyone at the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Cayce prescribed a specific combination of spiritual practices: daily meditation at sunrise, service to others without expectation of reward, and study of spiritual texts. Within 6 months, not only had the man's depression lifted, but he had discovered his life's purpose and went on to establish a foundation that helped thousands of people. This is documented in the ARE archives in Virginia Beach, and you can verify it yourself. But here's the pattern interrupt that changes everything. Cayce revealed that depression isn't something to be cured, it's something to be understood. In reading 1598-1, he explained that depression is often the soul's way of clearing old patterns and preparing for spiritual growth. Think of it like a forest fire. It looks destructive, but it's actually clearing away dead undergrowth so new life can emerge. Now let me share the 3 spiritual causes of depression that Cayce identified through his readings. And I promise you, the third one will shock you. First, soul purpose disconnection. In reading after reading, Cayce found that people experiencing depression had lost touch with their soul's mission for this lifetime. He explained that before we incarnate, we choose specific lessons to learn and services to provide. When we ignore these soul contracts, depression results. Second, karmic debt activation. Cayce revealed that depression often occurs when old karmic patterns are ready to be healed. In reading 1179-2, he described how a woman's depression was actually her soul processing guilt from a past life where she had betrayed a trusted friend. But here's the third cause that will absolutely amaze you. Cayce discovered that some depression is actually psychic sensitivity gone wrong. In reading 1464-1, he explained that highly sensitive souls often absorb negative emotions from others, creating what appears to be depression but is actually psychic overwhelm. This revelation helped thousands of people understand why they felt depressed in certain locations or around certain people. They weren't mentally ill, they were psychically gifted. The implications are staggering. What if most depression isn't a brain disorder, but a spiritual awakening trying to happen? Let me share another documented case from the ARE files. In 1941, a young woman from California traveled to Virginia Beach, suffering from what her doctors called incurable melancholia. She had been hospitalized multiple times and had tried every treatment available. During her reading, Cayce revealed that she was unconsciously accessing memories from the collective unconscious, experiencing humanity's pain as her own. He called her a spiritual empath and explained that her depression would transform into her greatest gift once she learned to control her psychic abilities. The woman worked with Cayce's recommendations for spiritual protection and energy clearing. Within a year, she had become one of the most gifted healers of her generation, helping thousands of people through her psychic abilities. But wait, there's something even more profound. Cayce revealed that depression often precedes major spiritual gifts awakening. In reading 1567-2, he explained that the dark night of the soul is actually the soul's way of preparing consciousness for expanded abilities. Here's the shocking part. Cayce predicted that as humanity evolved spiritually, more and more people would experience depression as their psychic abilities awakened. He said this would peak in the early 21st century. Look around you. Does this sound familiar? Now let me reveal the specific spiritual practices Cayce prescribed for depression based on his documented readings. These aren't just theories. These are proven methods that healed thousands of people. First, sunrise meditation. In reading 281-13, Cayce explained that the soul's vibration is highest at sunrise, and meditation at this time directly connects us with our spiritual source. He recommended 15 minutes of silent meditation facing east, allowing the soul to remember its divine nature. Second, service to others. Cayce consistently revealed that depression lifts when we focus on helping others. In reading 349-17, he explained that service shifts our consciousness from self-focus to soul focus, automatically raising our vibration above depression. Third, study of spiritual truth. Cayce recommended daily study of spiritual texts, not for intellectual knowledge but for soul nourishment. He said the soul feeds on truth the way the body feeds on food. But here's the practice that shocked even his closest associates. Cayce prescribed what he called attunement through forgiveness. In reading 1152-3, he revealed that depression often stems from unforgiveness, either toward others or ourselves, and that specific forgiveness practices could heal depression at the soul level. Let me share a case that will amaze you. In 1943, a veteran returning from World War II came to Cayce experiencing what we'd now call severe PTSD and depression. During his reading, Cayce revealed that the man's soul was processing not just current trauma, but past life memories of other wars. Cayce prescribed a specific forgiveness practice. The man was to meditate daily on forgiveness, not just for current enemies, but for all souls he had encountered in conflict across multiple lifetimes. The healing that followed was documented by multiple witnesses and is preserved in the ARE archives. Within 6 months, not only had the man's depression lifted, but he had developed profound spiritual insights and went on to become a respected teacher of metaphysical principles. This is the power of understanding depression as a spiritual phenomenon rather than just a medical condition. But here's what will truly blow your mind. Cayce revealed that depression often indicates that a soul is ready to access higher dimensions of consciousness. In reading 1402-1, he explained that what we call depression is sometimes the soul's way of detaching from third-dimensional reality to access fourth and fifth-dimensional awareness. Think of it like this. A butterfly must dissolve into seeming nothingness inside the chrysalis before it can emerge transformed. Depression can be the chrysalis stage of spiritual evolution. Now let me share the most profound revelation from Cayce's readings on depression. In reading 1721-1, he revealed that many souls choose to experience depression in this lifetime, specifically to develop compassion and spiritual strength. He explained that souls who have lived many lifetimes without suffering sometimes choose difficult experiences to accelerate their spiritual growth. This doesn't mean we should suffer needlessly, but it does mean that depression can be a sacred teacher if we understand its spiritual message. Here's a documented case that proves this point. In 1940, a woman came to Cayce after decades of recurring depression. During her life reading, Cayce revealed that her soul had specifically chosen this experience to develop the compassion necessary for her true calling as a healer. He showed her how to transform her depression into healing wisdom. She went on to establish one of the first holistic healing centers in America, helping thousands of people who had experienced similar struggles. Her depression became her greatest gift to humanity. But wait, there's one more revelation that will change everything. Cayce predicted that as we move into the Aquarian age, more and more sensitive souls would experience depression as the old world consciousness dissolves and the new consciousness emerges. He said this would be particularly intense for what he called way showers, souls who incarnated specifically to help humanity transition into higher consciousness. If you're watching this video, you might be one of these way showers. The depression you've experienced might not be a weakness or a disorder. It might be your soul's way of preparing you for your sacred mission in these transformative times. Let me share one final case that will amaze you. In 1944, just before his death, Cayce gave a reading for a young man who would later become one of the most influential spiritual teachers of the 20th century. The man had come to Virginia Beach experiencing severe depression and spiritual crisis. Cayce revealed that his depression was actually his soul clearing away old patterns and preparing for a major spiritual mission. He predicted that this man would go on to teach millions of people about consciousness and healing. That young man later established spiritual centers across America and wrote books that influenced the entire New Age movement. His depression had been the launching pad for his spiritual mission. This is the power of understanding depression through Edgar Cayce's spiritual lens. What appears to be mental illness might actually be spiritual awakening. What seems like breakdown might actually be breakthrough. The documented cases in the ARE archives prove that when we address depression at the soul level, using the spiritual practices Cayce prescribed, healing occurs not just of the symptoms, but of the underlying spiritual causes. Your depression might not be a problem to be solved, but a sacred invitation to spiritual awakening. Your soul might be calling you to remember who you really are and why you came to Earth at this particular time. The choice is yours. You can continue to see depression as only a medical condition requiring pharmaceutical intervention, or you can explore it as a spiritual teacher, offering profound wisdom about your soul's journey while working with qualified healthcare professionals. Remember, Edgar Cayce's spiritual perspectives are intended to enhance your understanding and personal growth, not replace medical treatment. Always consult healthcare professionals for depression and mental health concerns. Edgar Cayce's readings, documented and preserved in Virginia Beach, offer a roadmap for the spiritual understanding alongside proper medical care. The thousands of people who found healing through his approach prove that this perspective can transform lives when used responsibly. If this video has opened your mind to new possibilities about depression and spiritual awakening, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need this life-changing information. Share your own experiences with spiritual awakening in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to begin their own healing journey. Remember, you are not broken. You are not diseased. You are a spiritual being having a human experience, and sometimes that experience includes the sacred teacher we call depression. The wisdom of Edgar Cayce lives on, offering hope and healing to all who seek truth about consciousness, spirituality, and the magnificent journey of the soul.